Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's event. You got the job, now what? My name is Melissa Mayard, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Office of University Life, and as our moderator for today's program. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. Before we get started, I would like to take this time to do a land acknowledgement created by the Columbia University School of Nursing. We acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Lenape people on which we learn, work, and gather today at Columbia University. Lenape means real person or original person, and it is important to remember that Lenape, collectively, are a living and breathing community. Let us honor their legacy. Let us commit ourselves to the struggle against forces that have dispossessed the Lenape and other indigenous people of their lands. We stand strong in our commitment to support and defend all marginalized people of this land who have been stripped of their rights to self-determination. Thank you to Columbia's Nursing School who issued this acknowledgement. We encourage you to find out more about local indigenous territories and languages which you are sitting on in this moment. We are adding to the chat now the resource nativeland.ca by the nonprofit organization Native Land Digital to learn more about the indigenous territories, treaties, and languages across the world. Again, thank you again for joining us today. This event is part of University Life's Graduate Initiative for Inclusion and Engagement, which promotes Columbia's commitment to diversity and success of all graduate and professional school students. Before I turn it over to our esteemed panelists, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this program will be recorded and shared via University Life's YouTube channel. If you have any questions about this recording, please contact our office. Also, please make sure to remain muted. Towards the end of the program, there'll be an opportunity for questions, and we ask that you type your questions into the chat box so that we can answer as many as possible. We also recommend that you keep your view on speaker view versus gallery view. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Please note that these are shortened and abbreviated bios. Each of our panelists have achieved tremendous accomplishments, and I encourage you to look into them in more depth after today's program. First is Megan Heenhoff. Meg is the Executive Director of the Office of Career Services at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, otherwise known as SIPA. As well as an adjunct associate professor at SIPA. Prior to SIPA, Meg worked at Barnard College, where she held the positions of career counselor, internship coordinator, and student employment officer. Meg also maintains a private practice as a career coach and has worked with hundreds of individuals to help them find successful and satisfying careers. Next is Heather Krasna. Heather is a higher education career services practitioner, career coach, and author with more than 22 years experience in providing individual career advising to students and professionals from backgrounds including elected officials, university faculty and staff, senior researchers, nonprofit and government executives, career changers, and others. She is the author of 2 books, Jobs That Matter, Find a Stable, Fulfilling Career in Public Service, and 101 plus careers in public health. Our next panelist is Chris Sinclair. Chris is the Executive Director for Flip National. Flip is a national nonprofit organization that does advocacy work on behalf of first-generation and/or low-income college students at colleges and universities across the country. Chris is a graduate of the School of General Studies at Columbia University, earning his bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in business management, and was a founding member of Flip at Columbia. Our final panelist is Tomomi Uwatani. I apologize. Tomomi is a career counselor and coach with 12 plus years experience within the education and nonprofit fields, supporting students and professionals at various stages of careers. She currently works with the master's level social work students and graduates as a director of career services and leadership management at Columbia School of Social Work. Tomomi understands the struggle of identifying and pursuing a career direction and has dedicated her own career to creating opportunities and experiences that allow individuals to explore who they are and where they want to be and develop the knowledge, skills, and connections necessary to achieve their goals. These are our incredible panelists for today's event. And with that, please join me in welcoming them. Thank you for being here today. I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in and ask the panelists to answer the first questions in the order that they were introduced. And that first question, which I'm sure you're all dying to know, is to tell us a little bit about your career journey, who you are, and how you got there. So Meg, did you want to kick off?
There we go.
Oh, here. Okay, awesome. Go for it.
Yeah, so I have over 25 years of experience in higher ed. Went as an undergrad, studied both psychology and criminal justice because I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go to law school or get into counseling. Took a year off after undergrad to do some soul searching and decided I wanted to work with young people and in the counseling field. So got my master's of counselor education at Penn State. And then was offered a job as a guidance counselor in a high school in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. So I worked there for about 5 years. And then I made a conscious decision that I wanted to move to New York City, which I did. And I said to myself, I really love the career development component of what I do with the high school students, but I'd like to do it at the college level. So I applied for jobs in higher ed, was asked to come in and interview at Barnard and actually took the job of student employment officer there. I've probably held every job there is in a career office. So ask any questions you want. So yeah, I worked there as a career counselor, as the student employment officer. And then I was asked to teach at SEPA. So every student at SEPA has to take a half-credit professional development class that focuses on one's professional development, right? So we do resumes, cover letters, interviewing. So I'd been asked to teach that. And then from there, I was asked to join the staff at SEPA. So I came as assistant director, became director, then was promoted to executive director. And so I am involved in teaching the course, as I mentioned. I provide career advising to our students and alums. Oversee career panels and the like, conduct workshops. And we very much have an open door policy at SEPA. You know, if there's workshops or panels you'd like to see, pop your head in and talk to us about it. And we're happy to focus our programming in the direction that you would like to see. While I was at Barnard, because I was there, I interviewed and got a job at Barnard, I was on the Committee on Race, Religion, Identity, and Ethnicity. And through that did quite a bit of programming in this area. So have been involved and committed to this and happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Thank you, Meg. And I mean, it's clear you have a passion for this, right? Like it's just, you said you held every position, and I think every position probably contributed to the success of the students. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Krasna, and I am Assistant Dean of Career Services at the School of Public Health. Long story short, how I wound up doing what I now do is a bit ironic because, like many people in undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I hardly ever used career services. I attended the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which had, I'm sure, a good career center, but I was afraid to use them. I walked into their office, I think 2 or 3 times the whole time in undergrad, and just got intimidated for some reason. I did take a career assessment my freshman year, and it said I should be an anthropology professor or a podiatrist. And I remember that. And I can tell you why that is, which gives you a little more background, which is the reason it suggested that is that both of my parents actually were college professors. So I really grew up ingrained in the higher ed universe. This was like, you know, a fish surrounded by water. Like I did not have to adapt myself at all to the higher ed world because I grew up in that culture. So I had this huge privilege that was given to me unearned by virtue of these college professor parents and working, you know, living in a university town. So when I filled out that career assessment freshman year, one of the questions is, how much time off do you expect to have in your job? And I put, you know, the whole summer, because doesn't everybody have that? Like college professors don't teach in the summer. So little did I know, right? This is how naive I was back then about how most people's careers actually work. So I did do a number of things in undergrad. I was involved with lots of student leadership. I helped organize a nonprofit organization, but after graduation, I had no idea how to get a job. And so, like many of the students I work with, I went right to grad school because I was like, well, I seem to know how to survive in school. And so I guess I'll just keep doing that and hope something works out. But I went to the new school here in New York and I got my master's in nonprofit management. And I did my best to get every possible internship while I was in grad school because I knew like I really am gonna have to get a job after this. So I worked really hard to do that and got my first job in fundraising and grant writing and realized how much I hated that. It was not for me. And just by chance, I found an opportunity. It wasn't totally by chance, but I found an opportunity at Brooklyn College, CUNY, to raise money to create awards and stipends for internships. And when I got there, I found out they actually needed somebody to help students get internships. And I found out immediately that that was just way more satisfying than writing the grant proposals, and somehow made that career change. And I've been in career services ever since. I worked at Baruch College, which is part of CUNY as well. Then I went to the University of Washington in Seattle for 4 years at the policy school, so public administration. And then came back to New York, and through various networking and so forth, I was lucky enough to get my job at Columbia. So I'm kind of full circle. That nonprofit-y activist feel has followed me for the last several years, and that's why I'm lucky to be at the public health school and so on. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And you touched on so many points, Heather, already, like, navigating undergrad and saying, hey, what is it that I want to do? Then getting into grad school and saying, oh, I have to figure that out now. So definitely appreciate all of your insight. And, you have such a broad experience, even not only within career services, but across sort of different fields, different subjects of study. And so, I think it's really awesome to have you here. Thank you. Chris, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Under normal circumstances, I'd be like, you know what, this is a setup. How are you going to put me after these two people? But I have the distinct advantage of having graduated from the School of General Studies. And at GS, we have a different way of asking this question, which is, what is your GS story? And those of you who are Columbia affiliated, you're familiar with that. If you've not met a GS student, when you do meet a GS student, ask them their GS story. You will hear some of the best stories you'll ever hear. Shameless plug. Anyway, my career trajectory, who am I? Well, I was born on a Thursday. I have like a creation myth for the story of the day I was born. But anyway, fast forward. So my career trajectory is sort of out of order in a way. So I'll try to do the Cliff Notes version. My first time in college, I went to North Carolina, Chapel Hill. When I was growing up, I was a star athlete. I played football, I played basketball, I ran track, I played baseball. The county bent the rules so I could play 2 sports in the same season. That was my sort of trajectory. My first option was go to the NBA. Long story short, I went to North Carolina. I walked on the basketball team. For those of you who are not familiar, that is where Michael Jordan played college basketball. So wasn't an unrealistic dream until I hurt myself. That ended up being the end of my basketball career. I didn't know it at the time, but it ended up being the end of my basketball career. By the time I recovered and recuperated and was ready to go back to playing, my mom got sick. My dad got laid off. My parents are divorced. I had to leave school altogether to start working to support 2 households at 19. And that was really the first failure that I'd ever experienced in life, up until that, for the first real one. And I felt like I failed and I was sort of lost for a while, until I went back to community college, which was a byproduct of me working a bunch of jobs, eventually getting certified as a paralegal, working as a paralegal at a law firm, doing loan modifications at the height of the foreclosure crisis, fighting banks and mortgage companies. I used to tell people, once you do that, everything else is easy by comparison. Because it was a lot of fun. Let's just leave it like that. So long story short, I end up going back to community college because every year I had a little brother, and it was time for him to go back to school, and I would get the itch because I didn't leave school because I didn't want to be in school, or I couldn't hack it, or I left out of necessity. So I eventually went back to community college. So if you meet anyone that sort of frowns on community college, you tell them, you tell them to come find me, and I will tell them about themselves. Because I graduated with an associate degree in paralegal studies, even though I was already a paralegal, out of order. And then I transferred from community college to GS at Columbia. So you can tell everyone who frowns on community college that you ever hear of that you know of someone who transferred from community college into the Ivy League. And oh, by the way, it's not all that uncommon because a lot of community college transfers end up at GS. During my time at GS, I started doing the work that I currently do, which is running Flip National. Flip is an acronym. It stands for First Generation Low Income Partnership. We do advocacy work on behalf of first generation college students, as you heard in the intro. That work started as a college student. I started with Columbia Flip, which was, we formed to try to change the conversation and create space for first gen low income students at the undergrad level on Columbia's campus. We had a lot of success, made a lot of headway in our first year of existence, and really started a lot of the conversations that are continuing now, and had continued to do that work until this day. And so in the interim, I did do other things. I had other internships. I now run an internship. And so really looking forward to engaging in conversation and offering maybe a different perspective, but offering a lot of different things to this conversation.
That's awesome. And thank you, Chris. Thank you for, sharing your journey and sharing sort of all the many sort of challenges that probably students on this conversation might be facing, and not knowing how to have that conversation or share those thoughts and navigate the professional journey as a first generation low income student. I myself can share a similar story, and there are so many aspects to it, in addition to already just navigating school, right? Navigating being a student. Now it's also navigating being a student with these other intersecting identities, but knowing there are people like you, Chris, who are there to advocate for them and who are there to share that information. So again, thank you for joining this conversation. We really appreciate that. And next we have Tomomi. So Tomomi, did you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And Chris, I think you gave me the harder job of following your story, but I'm up for the challenge. So as mentioned earlier, I currently lead the career office at the School of Social Work, and I feel very blessed in that I get to combine, there's a lot of things I'm interested in, but I love career counseling. I love the social impact sector. The work that social workers do is so valuable, as we all, I think, especially realize over the last year. Mental health support, social support, advocacy, activism, it's also important. So I feel very blessed to be able to work with this community. In many ways, Heather, your story resonated with me. I'm where I want to be, but this is like 20 some years in the making. And in many ways, my story is not linear. And if you talk to people, you'll probably hear that many people's stories aren't linear. And in many ways, we just kind of created our path as we went along. So I studied psychology when I was in undergrad, and I always knew I kind of wanted to be in the helping profession. I didn't know what that would look like. I did take on a number of internships in social services. I was also a student of color recruitment admissions intern, which was a lot of fun. I actually interned at Columbia as well for the summer high school program. And I knew I kind of liked working with youth and above. I knew I kind of liked things related to college, career, but really, I just really didn't know what to do with myself after graduating. So the first thing I did was I'm just gonna work. Let's see what happens. I worked in the healthcare field. I worked in the legal field. And through that, one thing I learned about myself is that, you know what, I actually like listening to people's stories. I actually find that enjoyable, and I appreciate people sharing. And I found that my coworkers would say, you're so patient. I'm like, I kind of like hearing what's up, and being able to kind of provide resources of support to help folks. And then when I was in the legal field, it was in a legal administrative management position, and I thought I might have wanted to do HR. It wasn't quite HR, but it was about ensuring that staff were doing their jobs and doing performance reviews and things of that nature. So I like that kind of career professional development aspect of it. And so it kind of brought me back to what I was thinking about when I was in undergrad. Like I always liked kind of like guidance or career guidance or something along those lines. We spend so much of our lives working, but we don't get to spend this time thinking about like what that process looks like, and we all kind of organically figure out a way. And I'm on the same boat as Heather. Like I didn't really use my career office. And funny story, I actually applied to be an intern in the career office and I was rejected. And it's so funny how I come back to it, but it was a great learning experience. And I actually had an excellent, like my alternative internship was working in admissions. I can't complain. That was a fantastic experience, but it's funny how all those things kind of come back. But one thing I did do as I was kind of figuring out what did I want to do, where do I want to direct my energy, was really taking a lot of time reflecting on everything that I did. I kept a journal while working in the healthcare and legal field, and I was keeping track of like what made me excited, what energized me, what kind of people did I want to be around, and what didn't I want to do. I knew I didn't want to do the same thing over and over. I liked a variety of different things. I just didn't know what that looked like. But after doing all that reflection, oh, another funny story to this is I loved art. I loved graphic design, communication, things related to that. So I did actually do a certificate program also, and I learned that I'm not very good at it, but that was a good thing. I learned that I enjoyed it. I like the creativity aspect of it. I mean, things related to like logo design, all those things are really important. It's funny, it actually ties into career in many ways, or career development. But I decided professionally that might not be the route that I wanted to go to, but based on everything that I had learned about myself over the years of working in the healthcare and legal field, I was just like, counseling, this is what I've been thinking about. And I realized what was really stopping me was I was just afraid. I just didn't know if I was going to be good at it. Like, oh, what if I talk to people and then like I ruin their lives? And I realized, you know, I'm not that powerful. But you know, if anything, if I can help in any way, that is something that I thought would be rewarding. And when I did my counseling program, it was great. I had an opportunity to actually work in a high school that was focused on art and design. So it was a perfect way to merge my interest in the artistic area, work with students who are interested in that. And I thought I meant to become a guidance counselor, but then I had this other internship. And funny, Heather had worked in this office. It was at the Undergraduate Career Center at Baruch. And it was such a great privilege working there because they have counseling psychologists on staff. And so we got trained in holistic career counseling. And I thought, okay, this is kind of the direction I want to go into. I don't think I want to work in a school and become a guidance counselor, but I want to do something related to preparing folks for college and careers. So my first job out of grad school was working as a program manager and assistant director in the college access program, and I loved it. I love the variety of the work that we did. You know, we did mentoring programs, social emotional groups, college access programming, all that stuff. And I think it's so important. I also ran some internship programs for the summer, and just getting that experience is so critical. And to be able to provide high school students with that early on so they could start building their resume and explore careers, I felt was really significant. So I don't work at that organization anymore, but I'm still involved because I think it's just so important. After that, I transitioned back to higher ed, and I worked at Baruch's public policy school or public affairs school, where I work with graduate students who are pursuing careers in higher ed, public affairs, international affairs. And I just love working with people trying to do good. I mean, it's hard to not like it. And now I had the privilege of like transitioning to the school social work, which again, is so funny how it comes full circle, where I had thought about this career myself, but now I get to work with those who are pursuing that career. So here I am, and looking forward to speaking to everyone about all things career today.
That's awesome, Tomomi. And, you know, I think you hit so many different points, right? How do you find yourself through this process, right? How do you learn about yourself in this process? So even whether that's from undergraduate all the way through to where you might be now, you said, you know, 20 years in the making, right? And you've learned so much during that process. And that's what this conversation is going to be about today, right? Where do you start, right? You might have gotten the internship, you might have gotten the fellowship, you might have even gotten the job, or you're right on the brink to starting that application process. You might be a graduate student or a professional student who's at Columbia, and you said, okay, I'm here now. Okay, well, what is it that I do? What if this field maybe isn't what I thought it might be? Or what if it is, and there's so many options and you're not exactly sure where to start? And so, you know, I'll kick off with our next question. And maybe Heather, you could provide some insight about this. Your first entry-level opportunity, right? And that could be an internship during the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, that could be your first entry-level position. What sort of did you learn as far as how do you navigate those spaces, right? You're in this brand new space, you've never experienced it before. What were some thoughts that you had, and some challenges that you faced? And on the other side, what were some great things that you learned as far as that experience?
So the very first real full-time permanent job with a salary and actual benefits that I had was right after my master's degree, my first of two, actually. I just got another master's degree at Teachers College, but my first master's degree at the new school, and it was in fundraising and grant writing. And oh, somebody's saying TC. Anyway, another good part of Columbia. Yeah, so essentially, the take-home message was, you don't always find your dream job right after grad school. I discovered the reason that I looked at this particular opportunity and that I went in the direction of fundraising is that I knew there were lots and lots of jobs in fundraising and grant writing. And I guess I was anxious to find actual paid employment. And so I thought, and I had basically right after my bachelor's degree, I did attempt to find a job. Again, not using my career center at the University of Michigan put me at a big disadvantage. And I think at some point I went through some old papers and I found some of my horrific cover letters and resumes that I had written back then. And I was just like so embarrassed to see how bad they were. So anyhow, so I really failed at that point to get any kind of like real type of what I considered a real job, not babysitting, not camp counseling, not an unpaid internship, real job. Couldn't do it after my undergrad. And so I was anxious about that. So I thought, let me just look for jobs where I know there's a pretty good job market. Let me do that after grad school. And what I did learn from doing that job in fundraising is that the one thing I would say I learned the most about that was how to write persuasively. And that particular skill has gone on to be useful in resume writing, because when you look at what a grant proposal does, you're writing a narrative, which is for a particular target audience, which is usually a foundation, a philanthropy, a corporation, or whatever that might give you money as your nonprofit. I'm looking at Chris nodding because I know you're executive director. You know what I'm talking about. So you have this target audience and you're persuading them that your institution, your organization is worthy of providing this funding because you will be able to deliver projects or programs or impacts that the donor wants to see. Well, guess what a resume does? And guess what a cover letter does? Same deal. You have a target audience, all right? You've got a target audience, which is the person who needs to hire somebody to complete the work of the particular job. And you have to write persuasively to explain why you are the person that they should pay cash dollars in order to complete the work of that job. And so that skill has been very transferable. I hardly ever mention to anybody that I know how to do grant writing because I work at Columbia in a research-based institute, and they will take full advantage of that skill. And it's not necessarily my favorite of all skills to use. So I don't really mention it, although now I've blown my cover and everybody knows I can do this grant writing. So that's the plus of what I learned. The downside of what I learned, though, is that that even though I liked the mission of the organization that I was working for, the actual job function primarily was just not my jam. It was not fun for me. It was a lot of salesy stuff, and I'm not a salesperson at all. I can sell an employer on why they should hire my grads because I'm passionate about my grads and how awesome they are. And aside from that, though, I get a lot of anxiety about rejection with sales. It just wasn't my thing. And in fundraising, that's really the core of what it is. And I just was very lucky that I was able to sort of stumble upon career services. So my take home is learn whatever you can from whatever job you get after graduation. It may not be your long-term dream job. Hopefully you get something out of it, at least a paycheck minimally, right? But at most, ideally you get some knowledge of a new skill. And then if anything, you learn what you don't like. And the other tip is, on the one hand, it is wise and smart to pay attention to the job market and to maybe guide some of your efforts towards jobs that are in high demand. It will make your search a little bit easier. And temper that with making sure you actually won't hate your job every second. Just because there's lots of jobs in data science, if you do not love stats and Python coding, pick a different job, even if every recruiter on the planet wants to hire you for that field. Those are my words of wisdom from the first,
No, I appreciate
first
that.
job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned a couple of things that were important, right? Transferable skills, right? And, what are the things that can be directly applicable to any field, right? You said persuasive writing. That can happen in emails, that can happen in resumes, that can happen for, potential future employers that you're looking to do informational interviews with or connect with, right? And so that's something that as you navigate your first opportunity, looking at what are the transferable skills? What are the things that maybe I recognize by day 2? I'm probably not going to do this for a long time, but what are the things within my job responsibilities and my job description that I can take on with me throughout the rest of my sort of career and professional journey? So definitely appreciate that, Heather. And then the second piece, which I appreciate, is the emotional journey that is navigating your first sort of opportunity, right? All the anxiety that comes with, I've just graduated, I've spent all this money for an education, I want to, make sure that this works out. And especially as a first generation student, you might also have the weight of maybe, sort of a familial weight that's on there. How do I make sure that this works? And so navigating all of the emotions through that as well. But recognizing you'll likely be okay, right? You'll be okay. It's kind of going through the motions and the experiences and learning as much as you can. So yeah, you had a lot of great points, Heather. Thank you. Meg, did you want to talk a little bit about, your first opportunity and what were the things that were difficult and what are the things that you learned?
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting. My first job out of grad school was at a high school. I was a guidance counselor. And the one thing, I was talking to a colleague about this and he was like, you're absolutely right. The one thing, and no one told me this, I don't know how I even tripped over doing this, but the one thing that I said to myself was, every work environment is political, right? There's always going to be some politics. So the one thing I said to myself was, don't just watch the playing field and get an idea of who the power players are and who isn't the power player, right? And to also piggyback on that is be careful who you align yourself with early on. Like a colleague said to me, Meg, this one was really nice to me when I started, so we became good friends. It turned out she was kind of considered a little bit of the wackadoodle at the organization. And, he'd already created that alliance with her. So, and that was kind of hard to break. So if anything, just as I said, every work environment is political and hopefully in a good way. But just to kind of watch the playing field and see who's playing what role is very helpful. And then just be careful who you align yourself with. And take your time to figure out who you want to align yourself with, right? Because there's usually a number of people in an office on a floor. So that's my point of sharing.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate the statement you said, taking your time. I think there's a rush coming into your first opportunity to prove yourself or to, build your village and build your circle and things like that. But it's okay to take your time. It's okay to observe and learn. They say minimally, it takes about a year to get to know it.
Yeah.
Minimally, right? And that's just a year to get to know it, maybe 2 years to actually really kind of get to a point where things are just happening very quickly and easily for you, but taking that time, right? Because it'll really benefit you in the future. So yes, I appreciate that.
Exactly. I mean, there again, that doesn't mean you can't be nice to everybody. And the key there is to be nice to everybody, right? But like really to select your alliances, as you said, just take your time, be thoughtful about it. So
absolutely. Yeah. Don't go in and coming in and say, well, I went to a panel and they said, be a complete meanie and bully organization. No. Don't do that. But obviously, yes, building those villages and building your tribe as you're there. But Chris, you've also navigated different spaces and places, right? And so as you think back to your first opportunity, and it sounds like you kind of had multiple first opportunities in different sort of areas. What were some things that were difficult, and what were some things that were successful for you?
Well, it's funny because I think about this. Not only have I navigated this multiple times, but in working with the students that we work with, this is one of the things that we come across all the time is how to get a job, how to get to the place where you want to be. My first job after I graduated Columbia was actually at a law office that did pre-litigation claims on behalf of people who are victims of police brutality. And one of the reasons I took the job is because that was something that I was personally passionate about. And I was fully aware, and this is something that came up during the interview process, that I was sort of overqualified for the role. But I didn't care about that as much because I felt like I was going to be doing good work. And I stayed at that job for 4 months, in large part because the job didn't measure up to what I thought it would be. And so one of the things that's difficult to think about in terms of an entry-level job or that first job or that first opportunity, we got to tell some hard truths. And I'll be the one to say it. First thing is recognize that everyone here is, I've been told I'm good with analogies, and so I'll use a couple of them. Everyone here has an idea of what they want to do with their career. They have some semblance of what they want to do. The thing that you have to understand is to get to the end goal of where you want to go, you're not going to get there right after you finish school. You have to do the grunt work type things to get to those upper echelon levels, to get to a point where you can actually impact in the way that you want to impact. It's not going to happen right away. You're not going to, contrary to Columbia's belief, and I'll say it even though I'm a Columbia grad and I'm on Columbia's platform right now. Just because you have Columbia on your degree doesn't mean you're going to get that dream job right away. And and as first gen low income students, we also have to think about there's always the struggle that sort of informs what choices we make as far as a career. And I would say one of the things that I had to do was to balance the need to escape the struggle with being satisfied professionally and fulfilled in terms of the work I was doing. We can all go to Goldman Sachs and get a job and start making $100 grand a year, but do we want to do that? Does that fulfill us? Does that make us happy? There is a trend in the for the professional space generally about work-life balance, and that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, where we think about, okay, this is what I do as work, but what kind of quality of life am I going to have that I'm sacrificing these hours and all this energy and effort and blood, sweat, and tears that I'm putting into my career and my profession, right? So money is a factor, but that shouldn't dictate what you do. You should approach your search for a profession or how to sort of get ahead in what you want to do and accomplishing what you want to do. You should center and prioritize what makes you happiest. Because I was in this job and we were helping people. People were getting pre-litigation settlements. They didn't have to go sue the NYPD to get money for the mistreatment that was visited upon them. And that was helpful, but it was a lot of grunt work. And it was a lot of me starting off having to do what the office needed rather than being able to say, like, I have this to contribute and I have that to contribute, and working my way towards getting closer to what I felt like was what I had to contribute as opposed to what the office needed. So one of the things is embrace the grunt work. One time I was told by one of the deans at GS about just falling in love with the process, and learn this lesson from the late great Kobe Bryant. He would go into the gym and he would practice this dribble. He would dribble just with one hand, back and forth, back and forth. And he learned to fall in love with that process because that was what gave him the skill set to be the Kobe Bryant that we all saw on TV. That process, you cannot skip over that process. Another thing I'll say, and then I'll hand it off, I don't want to take up too much space, is one of the things I tried to teach my little brother, I mentioned I have a little brother, and I played a lot of sports. Basketball was my first sport. My little brother, he loved basketball, but he didn't really like any other sports. He never even learned to play baseball. He tried football, didn't really like it. He was good at it, but he didn't like it. Didn't really do anything other than basketball as far as sports. One of the reasons why I played sports is because sports are the best teachers of life lessons that we have. And more to the point of this conversation, I took things from every different sport that I played and I applied it to the sport I cared about the most. So when you're in your entry-level job and you're in an internship, you might not like it. You might discover that it's not for you, but everything that you do has something that that can teach you, or that you can learn from, or you can identify as a positive. You get this from that experience. You get that from an experience. So for example, in this analogy, let's use football. Football taught me how to handle physicality because it's a collision sport. It taught me the importance of everybody doing their job in unison. And the more times that you do your job better than the other guy does their job, the more often you're going to win. And the team concept and all of that. Baseball taught me how to think about, know all the options, know what happens and account for different situations. If this happens, then you need to do this. And if that happens, you need to do that, right? And I can go on and on about sports, but these are all things that I applied to basketball, and it made me a better basketball player, which is ultimately what I wanted to be. So all these different experiences that you have in your jobs, there are things that you can take away from those jobs and make them a better whatever it is you want to be. And you can draw from those experiences, learn from those experiences, and then impart those experiences on others. So that's what I'll say for now.
Absolutely. Again, those transferable skills. And I think you had a great point of, you know, what the job needs versus what you can contribute. And oftentimes in entry level and first opportunities, you might be doing more so of providing the needs, with the understanding that you can still contribute, right? And you can still figure out those opportunities if you can. And I think it would be ideal if you can find a place where you can sit down with a manager or sit down with a supervisor and say, you know, hey, I'm working on these projects for you. These are the things that are needed, but I'd really love to grow in this space, or I'd really love to contribute in this space. Is there an opportunity for me to do that and see the response? So, you know, definitely. Thank you, Chris. I want to be mindful of time. So Tomomi, I'm actually going to ask the next question and kick off with you, if that's okay. And you know, we just started talking about this, but how do you form strong connections with management or supervisors, especially coming into, you know, your first opportunity and your first position? It might be a little intimidating, right, to connect with the upper administration or the higher level professionals within your organization. So how do you believe you can form strong connections with managers or supervisors?
Thanks for the question. You know, I think about this a lot every time I start something new, where I just prioritize getting to know people. And that's what it comes down to. I know the lines between personal and professional have been blurred, but there is still a balance that you need to keep in terms of understanding expectations, needs, and goals. You are still going there to get paid for a job. So I think it's really important when you start a role to really understand, how does the manager think? You know, how do they like to communicate? How do they like to plan things? You know, they may be very different in their style from you, and it's important to understand that, because sometimes you may think that you don't get along, but meanwhile you just communicate differently. It could be something as simple as someone likes to come to your office to speak versus like they prefer an email. It could be just something as simple as that, but understanding their style and how they like to communicate, I think, is really important, and also fundamental in building relationships to start with. But I always like to understand like what's expected of me in like the first 3 months. You know, you can kind of put whatever time frame there, but what's expected of me? Like, what does success look like? You know, who are the players? You know, if the manager I'm speaking with is open to sharing, like, I want to know, like, who are the personalities? Like, who are the players? Like, what is it like working here? Who's a good resource for X, Y, and Z? And I try to get that information. And to a point that was made earlier, I mean, it's going to take time. So you're not going to find all that out. And sometimes you just kind of learn trial by error by interacting with people. But I think understanding different people's communication and work styles is really, really important, as well as understanding the expectations of your role. And that way you're not wondering, am I doing well? If you're already having open communication about that, then, you know, you're probably going to be in a good place.
Awesome. Thank you. Meg, I'm going to ask you the same question. How do you form strong connections with managers and supervisors in your first entry-level opportunity?
Sure. I agree with all your points. I also believe perhaps requesting, if it's not put on the table to begin with, requesting a weekly meeting with your supervisor to really make sure that you're staying on the same wavelength about expectations and things like that. And that way you're not surprised, right? You're not thrown a curveball by, your boss saying, I want this project done and I want it done by, the end of this week, that you are very clear about what the expectations are. So I think, like I said, asking if it's appropriate with your supervisor to have weekly meetings where you kind of outline what you're working on. And that's the other thing. You want to make sure that you're conveying to your supervisor what you're doing, right? What kind of projects you're working on. So making sure those lines of communication are open so that there's no surprise. I mean, it's one thing people will tell you is don't ever surprise your boss. Same kind of thing, right? If you're meeting weekly and you're conveying, this is what I'm working on, would you like me to put more effort into this project? There's no surprises at the end of the month or the end of the semester, right? So that would be my 2 cents.
Agreed. Yeah, no, bosses don't like surprises because bosses have bosses. So, always remember that, even within the entrepreneur world, you might have clients, you might have organizations that you're providing services for. And in a way, you are your own boss, but they also have a say sort of in your performance, right? And so showing that, no surprises, but opening that line of communication and setting that from the beginning, I think is super important. So thank you. A few points were made earlier about forming connections, figuring out what are you passionate about? What are you happy about? Heather, I'd love to ask you this next question. Navigating the virtual environment, right? There's gonna be this kind of potential transition between going in person, hybrid, virtual. So not only are many students kicking off with their new first entry-level opportunity, whether that's an internship, a fellowship, or a full-time job, they now have to navigate all of that in this sort of very hybrid experience. So can you talk a little bit about networking in a virtual setting as well as potentially networking in an in-person setting?
Sure. So I just want to add one thing to the previous question before we dive into this, and that's disagree agreeably. If you can learn how to disagree agreeably with your boss or colleagues, you will go much further. And I just want to share that, in the universe of academia, we're often trained to do some sort of debating and trying to prove our point. That does not fly all the time in the professional work world. And I really, it took me a while to learn that personally. And so I just want to share, if you can find a tactful, diplomatic manner to express a time when you disagree, such as saying, I hear what you're saying, and in my experience, ... That's a lot better than, well, I disagree, or blah, 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 but on the other hand, I think, and sounds more like a debate. So I just want to share that little tip. In terms of networking, I actually feel like, if anything, the virtual world has opened up a lot of new opportunities for networking that didn't exist as much before. So, those of us of certain Gen Xer or other generations may be very accustomed to shaking hands, trying to meet people in an open mixer situation. I personally, even though it's my actual job to teach people to navigate how to, work an open mixer situation or a reception or some other unstructured networking situation where there's just a bunch of people in a room, presumably you might all have something in common, like you're all at a professional conference together on the same topic or something like that. Even so, I've often still found those in-person mixer events, when they're very unstructured, I find them to be a little uncomfortable, because in an in-person mixer event, you have to navigate, okay, well, there's people talking to each other. How do I enter into their little circle? Am I butting in? What if they don't want to talk to me? There's that feeling of how do I what do I talk about? Do I have to understand about football so I can have some kind of added conversation in the small talk or whatnot? You know, all of that. On a Zoom call, which you can do anytime really, and you can do with anyone, anywhere in the world, unlike an in-person networking session, you know, you can have a little more control. It's a one-on-one situation that you can navigate. You can set those discussions up. You can use the amazing Columbia Alumni Directory, which I don't know if everyone knows is accessible to all students and alums. If you go to just the Columbia website, look under alumni, you can find that directory, that community. You can use LinkedIn. Some schools have their own mentoring program. You can find those alums. You can also find non-alums in your professional field. Individually on LinkedIn or other sources, reach out to those folks and present yourself as a student or a new entrant into a new field. People love helping students, by the way, and also new grads. I mean, it's delightful for most professionals to hear from a student, especially somebody who went to their same school, to say, you know, I am a new grad and I'm looking to get into a field like yours, and I really admire your career and I'd love to learn from you. I mean, what's nicer and more flattering than that, right? So don't be scared to reach out to people and individually ask for those Zoom chats or informational interview. Your goal is research the field, get to sense of what's actually going on in that job, that sector, that industry. What are the trends? What are the skills that are needed? What's a day in the life all about? See if you can get referrals. You know, can they introduce you to somebody else, you know, who also works in the field? What other organizations do this work? Who else should you talk to? What places, organizations should you join maybe? You know, if you're comfortable with it, you can actually ask for feedback on your resume or your LinkedIn. You're not asking for a job. Don't ask for the job in the informational meeting. However, you can still get feedback like, if I want to go into this field, what am I missing? Can you tell me frankly, like, what are the barriers for me? What do I need to do to get there? Am I missing anything on my resume? You can ask for that feedback also, and then be remembered, because this is your team. You need a community to support you in this journey. And this is how you build that community, is asking for some advice from folks who have been there and done that. And, you know, we have such a great alumni community, and so many people don't take any advantage of it. And I always tell my little analogy, and then I'll stop, is just, if you go to the grocery store, you know, and you pay for your groceries, you would not leave your groceries at the store. You would take them all home with you, right? If you go to Columbia University, you pay the tuition at Columbia University, you ought to be playing that up as much as humanly possible all the time. You are using that alumni community. You are using that marketing and branding, which is Columbia University, every possible chance you can, because it's valuable. You've paid for that. You've earned that. So be part of that and take advantage of it. That's my tip.
That is such a great analogy. I think I'm gonna use that in the future. I will credit you, Heather, I promise. But that is a really great analogy. You have a lot of resources and opportunities. And, you know, we have an alum on this conversation, right? And who can serve as a resource to you. And then we have obviously the other three professionals who are at Columbia, who ideally can support you as well. So we are getting a lot of great questions, you know, which to me just really speaks to the space that the four of you have created. And so I did want to get to a few of the questions, keeping in mind we might go a little over time, and if the panelists need to hop off, that's totally fine. Students, if you need to do the same as well, that's fine. But I did want to get an opportunity to at least ask a couple of the questions. And so, Chris, I'd love to speak to you about this. But our first question here: how do you leave a job? Are there formalities from place to place that are important to keep in mind about applying to other jobs while you're still working?
This is a good question. So first thing is, don't just stop showing up. That's bad. You want to make sure that you give your notice. Most places, you want to give 2 weeks notice to let them know, you know, I'm going to be pursuing another opportunity, or I'm going to be leaving. One of the things that can work to your advantage, especially if you're in an internship as opposed to a job, when you're an intern, the organization knows why you're there. The whole point of an internship is to build professional experience. And so there's an understanding that there is a chance that you might not stay beyond there, which makes networking all the more important. You want to make sure that you leave on good terms, that you leave a good impression, that you'll be able to use a position that you've held as a reference for future opportunities. So you want to make sure that you do your best to leave on good terms. There are tiny formalities and nuances depending on what field you're in with how you leave. There might be things like non-disclosure agreements, non-competes if you're in a job. If you're leaving one job in one field to work in against a competitor or in a job in a similar field, there might be a non-compete involved that sometimes comes into play with sort of the higher up jobs in terms of when you're further along in your career path. But there are some nuances there. But in terms of leaving a job, you just want to make sure that you've left a good impression, and you want to leave on good terms. That's especially helpful, believe it or not, when you're in a position that you had a hard time at. Sometimes your internship experience or your job experience is not going to be the greatest. And when you're able to leave that position gracefully, let's say, on good terms without burning bridges, you want to do your best to not burn bridges. If you're able to do that, that bodes well for your next opportunity.
Chris, I think that's a great point. I might also add, I think if you can, the most notice you can give, the better. Like I just had somebody in my shop, she's been with us for a number of years, but she got this other great opportunity. But she came to me and she said, Meg, you know, my last day is August 13th. So she's given me 6 weeks notice. But I think that, like you were saying, Chris, right, it's all about that kind of that good faith gesture where you can to help out, I think goes a long, long way. So I thought that was a great point that you made.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. Especially it is a small world. It is a big world. It is a very small world as far as the professional world, especially within fields, right? You know, work in higher education, and I'm sure even the folks on this call are probably connected by 6 degrees of separation in different ways, right? And so you definitely want to be mindful leaving your position. How are you leaving that position? What can they say about you? Should, you know, someone give your manager a call? What would they say, you know, you and performance? So just being mindful of that. Tomomi, I did want to ask you this next question. There were a couple of first person stories and narratives that were shared in the chat, but some of them had a common theme, specifically related to this question. So what should or can I do if I don't receive the job offer? How can I ask for feedback? And I think the little connection to that as well is ask for feedback that isn't generic, right?
That's definitely a tough one. You know, some companies have strict policies about what they can share with candidates. So you may not have much leeway in terms of how much information you can gather. You know, hopefully they are one that can, you know, they're probably afraid of like legal implications, but it doesn't hurt to ask. What I would say is, you know, don't assume that that's something that they will provide you, because most don't naturally provide you that information. And if you do, some HR folks or recruiting folks may provide some feedback along the way, and you know, you may not like what you hear. Make sure you take that in gracefully, because even if you may have performed in a way that you thought was good, it wasn't perceived well and it didn't work well for you. So take that information, be gracious about what you can gather. And again, it doesn't hurt to ask, but I would say just don't expect that they might share that information, and take full advantage of career services. Do some mock interviews, because you know, I might think I'm doing a good job and someone might say, you know, you're gesticulating a lot, or you say a lot of ums, or, you know, you're not really answering a question, and you may not realize that. And I think having that self-awareness before you go into the actual interviewing process is really key. And that's what we're all here for, to support you in that process before you enter the real world situation. And, you know, I remember when I first started the job hunting process after undergrad, I mean, you know, I hadn't taken advantage of career services and I was just winging it. And I just thinking about it makes me cringe. Like when Heather here was saying, I was looking at my resume, I'm like, oh my God, my resumes, my cover letters, my interviewing process, like, ooh, like let's get through that process in practice, and then, hope that in the real life scenario, you've done enough mock interviews to feel a little more comfortable and to be a little more targeted in what you're saying. And it just takes practice. I mean, even to this day, I always feel like I can improve. And the only way I can improve is to get that kind of feedback. So be very open with getting that feedback and try to take advantage of any opportunity where you can get that inside and outside that interview process.
I agree. Practice may not make perfect, but it makes progress, right? And so definitely seek an opportunity. And I think the other piece to that is sometimes it's not about your inabilities or your lack of performance, or you didn't just, or you weren't qualified. Sometimes you really didn't get the job because of so many other reasons, right? Internal hires, else just performed differently from you, and they see a fit that works better. And that's why, again, going back to Chris's point, it's not even just about leaving a job, it's also about how you respond to not receiving a job offer, right? Because you don't want to burn that bridge. I have seen countless students who receive job offers later, right? The organization has some new opportunities that open up. They remember your resume, they remember your application process, and they actually want to reconsider you for the opportunity. So making sure not to burn bridges is super important. So I'm going to ask one more question, and Meg, if you can answer this, that would be great. So one pitfall of the first job is that for one is on the menial type of spectrum. Second, it has slim upward mobility perspectives, but at the same time, it creates a little bit of comfort zone. How can one stay academically sharp and develop professional skills, even if they may be in a job quagmire?
Yeah, I would suggest one thing to kind of keep your skills honed, if you will. Think about joining a professional association while a student. So to give you an example, when I was in grad school, I did a counseling master's, right? So I joined the American Counseling Association, right? Well, as a student, those memberships are like $25 a year. The day after graduation, job in hand or not, like I pay now $500 for that same membership. Oh yeah, it's big. So joining these professional associations, and you can go online or see your career people at your respective schools, but you can find professional associations on any topic, political risk consulting, that kind of investment banking. There's a number of them out there, but consider joining one or two because you can also add them to your resume. So that also shows your commitment to that field. Also going to, let's say, their annual conference, you can also stay boned up on what's happening in the field. So, but also like networking with people who are in the field is also a great way to kind of hone your skills. And that's a totally fair question to ask. When you do informational interviews with people, totally fair question to say, what are the top 3 skills that you look for when you're interviewing candidates? And they'll tell you, right? So that can help you. Oh, I need to hone up on my Python, right? I have to focus on this skill, or my quantitative skills. So, but just talking to people who are in the field, joining also student professional associations. So are there student groups here on campus, like the Consultant Club? If I want to practice my case interviews, yeah, the Consultant Club would be a key one to join, right? Or the SEPA Finance Club, or the SEPA Energy group. So there's a number of them here. If you're not sure of them, you can also check with Student Affairs, because they keep a list of all student associations, but also just keep abreast of your skills, right? What skill set do you bring to the table? We've got information at our website that I'm happy to share, because you can find it anyway, but there's like a forum that's on our OCS forms page. It's called our Personal Strategic Career Plan. And it asks you a lot of questions about, what skills do you bring to the table? What are your weak spots, right? So that you can really be thinking more about, okay, what skills do I have? What other ones do I need to hone? So that's one fact sheet or a form that's available at our website. We also have what is known as a 2-year job search timeline. So if you are a graduate student, it kind of outlines what you should be doing every month of your first year and every month of your second. So you're welcome to take a look at that as well.
Thank you. Wow, really great. And Gabby was actually able to share the first site that Meg just mentioned. So feel free to take a look at that. And something, that really stood out to me that you mentioned, Meg, is this concept of informational interviews. That informational interviews don't just stop when you're in the application process. You should actually still be hosting informational interviews within your organizations and your opportunities, because the hope also, right, is if this is a temporary position, whether again, internship or fellowship, if you would like to continue working with that particular organization, it is important to set up those informational interview to ask your manager potentially, hey, if someone were to be seeking full-time opportunities here, what are you looking for in your full-time employee?
Yeah.
Right. And so informational interviews, and even if they can't offer you a full-time position, if you've built that relationship with them, they might be able to suggest someone who you can have more of a conversation with and be able to ask those questions. So definitely, I think what we're learning here, the themes is ask the questions, get to know folks, network, and use your resources while you're at Columbia, because those resources are there for you to do exactly some of the things that, to prepare you to do some of the things that all of our panelists have mentioned. And so, yeah, with that being said, I did want to be mindful of time. I know there's so many questions that were in the chat. I am happy to share the questions with the panelists. If the panelists have an opportunity to respond, they might be able to provide some of the responses back, and we'll be able to share them with you personally. So we wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us in this conversation. I want to thank the panelists for all of their great feedback. As you can tell, they are all just really here, and they're doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They volunteered for this as well, for this experience, to just share their insights. So we definitely appreciate all of their time. I do also want to remind everyone that today's event is part of the Graduate Initiative for Inclusion and Engagement. This is only one of a series of events throughout the summer and fall and spring semester. To learn more on upcoming events, be sure to check out our events calendar, which has been included in the chat. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to everyone who attended and participated. We hope that you were able to gain a lot out of today's event. I saw some great conversation that's happening in the chat. So once again, thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.